Ford was built on the belief that the world doesn't get to decide what you're capable of. You do. So ask yourself, can you or can't you? Can you load up a Ford F-150 and build your dream with sweat and steel? Can you chase thrills and conquer curves in a Mustang? Can you take a Bronco to where the map ends and adventure begins? Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Ready, set, Ford.
This episode is brought to you by KPMG. Making an impact is how KPMG helps make the difference. KPMG applies advanced tools and strategic thinking to convert data into actionable knowledge and deliver value by improving performance through transformation, modernizing processes with technology, harnessing the power of data, navigating complex M&A transactions, and enhancing trust among stakeholders. Go to kpmg.us/advisory to learn more. KPMG. Make the difference.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. In a surprise, Fox News is reporting that the knives are out for FBI Director Kash Patel due to a series of recent missteps, including the botching of key facts about the hunt for Charlie Kirk's assassin. That this is coming from Fox News may be a sign of how dire Patel's internal standing has truly become. Yet we're in the middle of a complex moment. Even as Patel's tenure is beset with follies, we may be facing a dramatic expansion of power for federal law enforcement, in particular to target the liberal left in response to Kirk's assassination. Stephen Miller just telegraphed this with some new quotes that are truly grotesque. So we thought we'd take stock of all this with someone who knows about the FBI from the inside, Asha Rangappa, a former FBI special agent and now a prominent commentator. Asha, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So Fox News reports that the knives are indeed out for Patel, quoting one source saying that the White House and Attorney General Pam Bondi have no confidence in him. This comes after Patel prematurely declared that the FBI had apprehended the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk, but also after Patel feuded with Bondi over the release of the Epstein files, which was an utter fiasco for the administration. Asha, Fox also quotes sources close to Trump saying he's not thrilled with Patel. What do you make of this reporting?
This is an incredibly image-conscious administration. So whatever ideological alignment there is, Trump in particular does not like to be made to look bad. And it sounds like everyone agrees on both sides of the aisle that Patel made him look bad. I mean, not just him, but his administration. This was a very bungled response from the FBI director. I don't think we can remember any director doing these kinds of missteps. And in fact, to the extent that anyone did, we could look at James Comey, who I don't know that he got in a wrangling match with Attorney General Loretta Lynch, but he clashed with her, and that was what led to his firing. So Patel should have known better, I think, given who his boss is and given the history of the people in his position.
How does Patel rank compared to previous FBI directors? This is a guy who Trump picked precisely because he stupidly and corruptly vowed in advance to use law enforcement against Trump's enemies, and Patel was woefully lacking in experience too. What do you think the rank and file sees in this guy?
Well, both he and the deputy director, Dan Bongino, have they're influencers. That's what they are. And I think it's pretty clear to everyone that no one in this administration is being hired because of their expertise or experience. They are being hired because they're a particular kind of celebrity in that world, right? This is true. I mean, we have the Fox News to government pipeline now, and this is the influencer to the government pipeline in the FBI. So I don't think I don't think anyone would put him in the same category as any of the previous directors of the FBI. And unfortunately, I think that this investigation, the Charlie Kirk investigation, is demonstrating why that experience and expertise is so important for someone in the position that Patel has, because this is the kind of investigation that requires coordination with local partners, which requires an understanding of, frankly, like basic terms. Like if you say like a suspect is in custody, that generally the public believes you've caught the killer. Things like that, and just messaging, all of these things that it sounds like he's just not aware of how all of these pieces fit together. And most importantly, that the director typically just takes a back seat on all of this. In my recollection, it's usually the head of the field office that's handling the investigation or working with the local law enforcement. Those are the people that are in front of the cameras, if they are at all, because they're the most familiar with the investigation.
Well, I want to also point out that Fox reported that Patel has gotten guidance from Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio on how to improve his relationship with Pam Bondi. And by the way, we should note that this comes from one of Fox's real reporters, not one of its personalities. This is real reporting from inside the administration. That strikes me as a sign that he's really on some thin ice in there. You know how this works. Does he seem like he's on thin ice to you?
I think so. I think that the fact that this is reporting that's coming from inside the bubble, and that these are people that we are hearing within the tribe that are turning on him. That's usually the death knell for any of these people. When I look at the range of people in this world, my sense is that Trump really likes Pam Bondi. I think that if he were to trust somebody's judgment, it would be hers. So I think she has a lot of sway. I don't think that this is somebody that J.D. Vance would go to bat for necessarily. So those are just not great things in Patel's favor. He's not, I think, in the MAGA admin totem pole, necessarily at the top, as far as I can tell.
Right. My sense of this is that, yes, that Pam Bondi doesn't like him. They've really fallen out, that Trump would actually take Pam Bondi's word on a lot of this stuff. On the other hand, Stephen Miller seems to be a tight ally of Kash Patel, probably because he's just as lawless as Patel is and is just as determined to go after Trump's enemies with law enforcement. And that brings me to what Miller is saying. He's making it absolutely clear that the administration is about to ramp up a major campaign against the liberal left, including targeting many of its organizations. Listen to this from Miller.
We are going to channel all of the anger that we have over the organized campaign that led to this assassination to uproot and dismantle these terrorist networks. The organized doxing campaigns, the organized riots, the organized street violence, the organized campaigns of dehumanization, vilification, posting people's addresses, combining that with messaging that's designed to trigger and incite violence, and the actual organized cells that carry out and facilitate the violence. It is a vast domestic terror movement. And with God as my witness, we are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe again for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
Asha, note how he keeps repeating the fiction that the organized left somehow inspired the attack on Kirk and other mass violence. And note how he says the government is going to do this crackdown using DOJ in Kirk's memory. They're going to excuse this by saying they are carrying out what Kirk wanted. What's your reaction to all this?
When I hear Stephen Miller speak, I just hear a lot of propaganda tactics, transferring the actions of one person to an entire group, then using that as a justification for, he's using the words of law and order, but in many ways it's an appeal to threats of force and fear. Ad baculum, and he's in fact kind of arguing to do the same thing that he's accusing the opponent of doing. It's incredibly dangerous talk because whatever the government might do, and we can talk about that, like what the capabilities are of the FBI to try to go after these, it's also doing exactly what they say they're condemning. It is arguing to the people listening that this entire group of people, the political opposition, is an existential threat, and this is encouraging people to take matters into their own hands. It's exactly the opposite of what the kind of rhetoric we need to be hearing right now.
To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than right here on the DSR Network. And there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than by becoming a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, early episode access, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 25% off discount on sign-up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
I'm just going to throw out a little factoid for people to chew on. When you hear Stephen Miller, of all people, talk about organized political violence, let's just remember that Stephen Miller was directly involved in what may be the largest act of organized political violence in the United States in modern memory, which is January 6th.
Exactly. I'm actually really surprised that no one, even in the pushback on the which side has more political violence, like I haven't heard references to January 6th. It almost seems like the whitewashing is successful and people have memory hold it. And as you mentioned, that was the definition of political violence. It was done, it was organized, it was done for a political goal, and it was violent. We actually had people convicted of seditious conspiracy, which required that it showed that they were armed and ready to use force in order to try to thwart the enforcement of the laws of the United States. So I think the media should really be focusing on that comparison because this just is not a both sides kind of thing, and we have this very obvious example of politically motivated violence that not only happened, but was pardoned by this administration to the tune of about 1,500 people let free.
Right, exactly. What actually happened is the President of the United States pardoned hundreds and hundreds of people who committed an act of organized political violence against the United States. And in so doing, essentially told Trump voters across the country, now let's be clear, the vast majority of them are not violently inclined, but what Trump was doing is letting the small percentage who are violently inclined know that they will turn a blind eye to any violence carried out on Trump's behalf, any political violence carried out against the left on his behalf.
Yes, and maybe more specifically, the people who engaged in this violent action on January 6th are now very aware that they have license, I guess, to behave in that way.
They absolutely do. So, Asha, what could the FBI do to harass liberal groups based on the pretext that these groups contributed in some sense to mass leftist violence in general, or the Kirk assassination in particular? What's the nightmare scenario? Can you walk us through some specifics? What could happen?
Yes. So the less nightmarish option. Okay, so just to go do a little history, we know about Hoover's FBI that investigated groups involved in protected First Amendment activity, right? Because he believed that they were subversive. What came out of the church hearings that investigated this in Congress was something called the Attorney General Guidelines. These are internal rules, basically, that are promulgated by the Department of Justice that govern how the FBI can conduct investigations. So under those rules, if they are being followed, the FBI is prohibited from opening an investigation based solely on First Amendment activity. In other words, even if someone is saying things they don't like, it has to cross the line into criminal behavior. It has to actually cross the line into criminal conspiracy, an agreement to commit a crime, or actual, criminal acts. I guess perhaps incitement, but incitement is a very high bar. I mean, such a high bar that even Jack Smith was not convinced that he could charge Donald Trump with it on January 6th.
I would think that a lot of agents internally are going to want to follow those guidelines no matter what orders come down, right?
100%. I think that so under those norms, and assuming that those regulations are still in place, there would have to be specific and articulable facts that an actual violation of federal law has been committed in order to even open an investigation, and those facts cannot be solely First Amendment protected activity. Okay. So the way the FBI normally works, in order to prevent a return to anything like what Hoover did, they would not be able to open these kinds of investigations just based on, we don't like this organization.
So in the less nightmarish scenario, what would they do to sort of make it look as if they're, doing what Stephen Miller wants, but without really violating rules and laws and norms? Is there some sort of intermediary thing they could kind of go through the motions of doing?
So what I think, they might try to do, and this is something that I've thought for a while, is, it's interesting to me that he keeps mentioning NGOs, because, one of the things that they've done is designate these groups like Tren de Aragua, for example, as a foreign terrorist organization. That triggers certain statutes, okay? So, for example, if you donate money or you provide assistance to a foreign terrorist organization, you are potentially providing material support to terrorism. So, in other words, there may be other hooks that they could use to go after organizations that help immigrants or refugees and things by saying, oh, they are helping terrorists. And I feel like I've been hearing echoes of this. So, they would need to find some hook like that.
So it would be hard to designate the Center for American Progress a terrorist organization under this rubric.
It would be impossible. We don't have a rubric to designate domestic organizations as terrorist organizations. It is a foreign terrorist organization. And so there are specific statutory criteria. It is a determination made by the executive branch, but it is based on certain criteria. And we don't do that for domestic organizations, precisely because of the slippery slope that can happen. Now, the bad news in all of this is that these internal guardrails and guidelines are all internal. This isn't legislative. This isn't, the oversight by Congress. These are Attorney General guidelines, meaning they're promulgated by the Attorney General, which means that it's really up to her to make sure that they are checked and that they're enforced.
Well, some of the Trumpists are actually talking about going after non-governmental organizations. So clearly they're looking to cast a pretty wide net in terms of the groups they go after. They want to go after the kind of constellation of liberal groups in DC and other related organizations. What's the nightmare scenario here?
Yeah, so I think there are two sub-nightmare scenarios here. One is that they do what Hoover did, which is to do all of this covertly, right? To basically turn these into national security investigations. So they're secretly investigating these groups, maybe getting information about their membership or finances, and, and where they go with that, I'm not sure. Like, then they release it and dox them, or who knows, something like that. The other sub-nightmare scenario is that they do it overtly, in which case then they are actually, following these people, doing physical surveillance and going through their trash and interviewing their neighbors and kind of basically putting them all under a cloud of suspicion. This is sort of the way that they have been operating in a lot of these other cases, like Adam Schiff and Letitia James and things. If something's happening covertly, you may not know you're being investigated. If you're being investigated overtly, then, you go get a lawyer, et cetera. And it's not clear to me that there's anything that in either of these situations anyone can do until they're actually charged with any kind of crime.
Let me ask you this, Asha. Would that require Attorney General Bondi to suspend a bunch of internal guidelines? And is that the thing we should be watching for? In other words, if we see Pam Bondi suspend guidelines, then we'll know here it comes, correct?
Well, even if she suspended the guidelines, I don't see how we would know. It's an interim thing. I don't think they would announce it. We would get leaks, perhaps. Or you just have people who are violating them and there's no repercussions because, they're not being reprimanded or investigated internally. I think that would be a good question, actually, for the Senate Judiciary Committee to be asking Kash Patel during the hearing on whether the Attorney General guidelines are still enforced, whether they're still in effect, but they're still enforced. I mean, that could be a way to bring that out into the open. It does seem to me that the guidelines have more or less gone out the window just from kind of the kinds of cases that we've seen. And in addition to the guidelines, just based on, for example, assuming that the executive orders that, for example, Trump has put out about Chris Krebs or Miles Taylor, those are completely unpredicated allegations, right? Those are allegations of treason or whatever. I mean, they are not based in fact. If the Bureau is actually investigating those, that would be, I think, just ipso facto or prima facie evidence that, they're not using the guidelines. And then I think we also see that other guardrails are not being followed either. I mean, the Justice Department manual has very specific guidelines on when you charge somebody and how harshly you charge them. And we definitely have seen in the Washington, D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office that they have been overcharging crimes to the point where grand juries are returning no bills. So, I'm just saying that in a normally functioning, Justice Department where even at least the rules are being followed, like I think even in the barred Justice Department, I think they were most still abiding by the Justice Department manual and Attorney General guidelines. I don't think that we would be in as bad of a situation as if they dispensed with that. And I think that in order to find out whether they dispensed with it, it's going to take either leaks, whistleblowers, or members of Congress are just going to have to ask outright.
I take two things from this. One is that we're going to really need whistleblowers more than ever to let us know what's going on in there. And that if we start to see leaks letting us know that guidelines are being thrown out the window, probes are being launched, we'll know it's really on. The second thing is that we all have to hope that Kash Patel is so damn incompetent and such a bumbling fool that he can't really get that far with any of this stuff. Folks, if you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to check out Asha Rangapa's Substack, The Freedom Academy. Asha, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you again.